Welcome in to the newest episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. Glad to have you with us, joining us for episode 88 of the pod. Hard to believe we are inching closer and closer. That big episode 100 going to be here in just about 3 months' time. Pretty crazy. It is upon us. But before we get started with today's episode, where we will be breaking down all things episode 7 of the Acolyte titled Choice, I want to give you a quick reminder that if you're not yet subscribed to the Hoth Hangout channel over on YouTube, definitely check us out there for the video version of every podcast, as well as our reactions to the latest Star Wars episodes when they go live, including The Acolyte, of which you can find all 7 of our reactions to the 7 released episodes over on YouTube. I want to thank the 437 of you who are YouTube subscribers. Additionally, you can contact us via email at hothhangout@gmail.com with your Star Wars thoughts, questions, or otherwise, and we'd love to showcase them here on the pod. The Hoth Hangout podcast is findable wherever you get your podcasts, including both Spotify and Apple. And if you're listening on either of those platforms or any platform that allows you to leave a 5-star review, leave a 5-star review on the pod. We would appreciate it very much. And it does also allow it to be more easily discovered by other folks who love Star Wars as well. You can find us on the socials, whether it be TikTok, Instagram, or X. We are at Hoth Hangout. On each of those, the Hoth Hangout community Discord server is findable in the show notes of today's episode. Check it out and see everything that the Hoth Hangout Discord server has to offer and in store for you. As we begin today's discussion of the Acolyte episode 7, I want to pose the question and put it out there. Will Mother Coral be in the finale? I believe that's probably one of the larger questions looming as we are approaching the finale, of which we are going to get in just 6 days' time. But before we get into our discussion of today's episode of episode 7 of the Acolyte, I should say, Joey, what's going on? How you doing?
Pretty good. We are all together again. You, me, and Gilbo. It feels like it's been a while since the three of us have been able to produce an episode together. So, fortunately, Gibbo is feeling sick, so we want to give a quick little shout out to Gibbo. Hope you do feel better, but he is powering through and helping us on the producing side. So, thank you, Gibbo, as always. But yeah, as much as for this episode for the rest of Acolyte. We've only got, like you said, 6 days left. I don't know where we're going to feel like, what we're going to feel like at the end of it, either happy or sad or confused or angry or all of those things. But we are here for it. We can't wait to see what happens in the next week.
Yeah, it's gonna be kind of a crazy week leading up to the finale, like you mentioned. It's a lot of speculation, especially after episode 7, which didn't go over super well with a lot of Star Wars fans, and lots of questions looming, both about the episode and just kind of what it means for the rest of the show. The rest of the show being just next week's episode. So we'll talk about some of that speculation probably towards the end of today's episode. And as we progress into our discussion today, as we usually do here on the pod, want to showcase a couple pieces of news in the world of Star Wars, as well as touch on a few viewer comments and our polls from last week before we begin our discussion. In terms of the news this week, we've got two pieces. The first of which is in the world of video games as it relates to Star Wars Outlaws. It has officially gone gold, which I recently learned means that it is entirely completed and ready for launch. Star Wars Outlaws becomes available officially on August 30th. We've covered it a little bit here on the Hoth Hangout channel already and watched the trailer together, I believe, as well. But this is good news, Joey, in terms of the game being ready for release. It's all set to go. This is something that fans, I would assume, are pretty excited to hear, are they not?
Absolutely. When you have a game go gold like this, especially 2 months before the expected release of the game, just means that the game is fully vetted, it's fully tested, ready to go, gets shipped out the door. I don't know, do they still print out discs? I have no idea. I'm digital only now, so I have no idea if there's actually physical copies of this game that'll be out. But either way, they're all ready for it. And I think you and I are the same where we have been kind of up and down with this game because it seems really cool, but then they throw it behind a paywall where you can't even do one of the job missions.
Mhm.
So this is like the love hate type of relationship with this particular game. Right now, I'm excited because now it's gone gold and now we know that it's fully ready to go. So right now I'm on the upswing. So maybe I do pre-order and buy it for August 30th.
some Star Wars Outlaws live streams in the future of the Hoth Hangout channel. Who says no? We'll have to see if that's in our future plans for the channel as well. But let us know down in the comments or on the socials if you're planning on picking up a copy of Star Wars Outlaws and playing it, and what you're most excited for the release of that game. Again, that comes out in 50 days time from the time of this recording. So be on the lookout for it coming to a store slash digital store near you. The other piece of news we wanted to showcase today is related to the world of Star Wars cards. This in particular, the Star Wars Unlimited TCG. The new release comes out 2 days from the time of this recording on July 12th. And name of the first set was Shadows of the Empire. But what is the name of the second set, Joey, that comes out in 2 days' time?
Yeah, the next one is being called Shadows of the Galaxy. So though this set is going to be mainly based around bounty hunters and smugglers. If you see in the video version of the podcast here, we have a couple of pieces of art. These are actual the pieces of the art on the cards themselves. We have Moff Gideon. We also have the Mandalorian as well. So
Mm,
these particular two were they are leaders. If you kind of remember the box break we did, Ben,
mhm.
there are things called leader cards, and then there's some location cards. So Moff Gideon and the Mandalorian are actually leader cards that you can get. These two particular art pieces are only available in the pre-release version of the the packs, which are currently available. But the for general release, it's going to be coming out on the 12th. So a lot of people are excited for it. I actually went to a shop to kind of ask around to see what the hype was. What so they were actually holding an event already for this set. So like I said, there are pre-releases that they kind of go out, and it's just like any TCG game with like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh, or so you could actually, this is like a tabletop game that you could have you could like battle against another player essentially. But for me on the collector side, I just like having the art. I like having the cards themselves. So look out for a new video probably coming out in the next week where you and I, or just I, will be opening a box of this as well, just like we did in the first set.
Nice. Yeah, the box break videos are always just a fun, chill time. And as someone who, like, admittedly knows probably far less than you do about Star Wars TCG, kind of that whole world, I'm just sitting there admiring, like, ooh, look at that one. Oh, look at that one. That one looks neat. So,
Yeah, I'm not very far from that either. I'm that's exactly where I'm at it with it.
yeah, yeah. Well, hey, like you said, box break coming soon here on the Hoth Hangout YouTube channel. Check it out. Those of you on YouTube or those of you listening on audio, check out the YouTube video coming soon of the box break. So we've got a couple viewer comments to showcase today from. I know these are from at least the last week, maybe even the last 2 weeks, if
No,
I'm not.
this is all last week actually.
Wow. Okay, so
All This is all last week's episode.
we've got what, like 4 or 5 comments in total, and so yeah, I mean, that speaks a lot as to, kind of the amount that people have been watching, The Acolyte. I feel like the amount of especially folks, on YouTube who have been chiming in with their comments in recent weeks is kind of far more than we would typically get on an episode, so it's been fun to, get to, communicate back and forth with a lot of, new folks over, in the comment section with their thoughts about the episodes in recent weeks. But yeah, last week I was traveling. I was away on vacation, and so I was unable to watch the episode with you. So you soloed that episode last week. Great job doing that once again as well. And that's what our first comment here is from. I am Evan Lee. I'm maybe mispronouncing that username, but I am Bevan Lee. Said great episode, Joey, with a little set of nice emojis there to follow. Similarly, Jose, in response to the episode that you did last week, said, "I think Soul did the accident at Brendock." Obviously, we know the answer to that now, and that's like kind of correct, I would argue. I mean, yeah, more or less. So, obviously, we'll be talking about that a lot in today's episode. But shout out to those two folks for their comments as well. We had another comment from Lord Galvatron, a frequent commenter on the podcast we were going to showcase. Lord Galvatron said, "Great solo episode, Joey. Question of the week response. I don't think Soul will turn to the dark side, but he does have a dark side. which is whatever happened on Brendok, which they teased for 3 straight episodes, by the way. Annoying. I mean, yeah, this is something I could pose to you, Joey. Does it feel like Soul has a quote unquote dark side?
The way that he was portraying him, most definitely, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say necessarily a dark side, but he was doing things that would lead him towards that. A lot of emotion, for instance.
Mhm.
We know what emotion can get you. You just don't, as a Jedi, that's something you don't really hone in on or really acknowledge at all. And maybe that is one of the flaws of the Jedi, that, if that's something that uh they're not supposed to even talk about. They talk about emotional attachments all the time. I think Andara even mentions that in this particular episode. So I think maybe not full on the dark side, but he has those tendencies. He's been leaning towards that way, and especially with at the end of the this particular episode that we were reviewing, he basically handcuffs May, right, and tells her like, "Oh, we gotta talk." I mean, this it doesn't feel very Jedi.
Right, yeah. Yeah, more emotion than we're used to seeing, like you said, than kind of the typical Jedi stance, but, thank you to Lord Galvatron for that comment, and yeah, I would say it was a little bit annoying, like, waiting for the 3 episodes, but, we got it this week, didn't we? And, but back in regards to, last week's episode, episode 6 of The Acolyte, Kid Caduceus commented, "I think Soul will either die or leave the Order, or the last line of the last episode will be, 'I am Soul, Skywalker.'"
All right.
Wouldn't that be quite the what
The
is it?
big twist.
The rug under the feet pulling, yeah. No, I don't know. I feel like I would be surprised if they kill off Soul at the end of the
Yeah,
season, but we'll see,
because
we'll see.
there really wouldn't be much left to do if he was gone.
Yeah, he's been I mean, for as emotional as he acted in episode 7, he's been, one of the brighter parts of the show, I would argue, just the actor's portrayal of the character, so I don't know, if they ever have a hope of doing, like, a season 2 or something, to get rid of Soul now would feel I don't know, I'd be like, "Ah, we're not gonna get him anymore?" You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
anyways, shout out to Kid Caduceus, another frequent commenter on the podcast, we appreciate you. Our last comment today is from another frequent commenter, Spy on Sports. Spy on Sports said, "I think Soul has a plot twist coming. I think it will be a redemption story. Vernestra may be the one that has a dark side, as we possibly learn that she was Chimere's Jedi master. She may have masterminded the events on Brendok to prevent her former Padawan, Chimere, from obtaining the power of two, Osha and May, from the Witch's Coven." This feels like a fun fan theory. I mean, I
Hmm.
would even I would even throw, after having seen episode 7, like, almost throw Indara kind of in the same boat as Vernestra, like,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
both doing things that seem very un-Jedi like electing to not tell the council about very what would seem crucial things. So, um, I could see Vernestra being bad. I could even see Indara being bad. We don't really know what's
Hmm.
gonna come next week. So, all that being said, lots of fun fan theories out there at the moment, regarding Mother Coral, Vernestra, and Dara. There's, I guess, many different directions the rest of the show
Hmm.
could go, but
And some of them not fun, but
right, and some of them not fun. Yeah. Nonetheless, let us know if you have any fun fan theories about what the conclusion of this show will look like, and keep the comments coming. We appreciate them very much, and we'll showcase some of them on next week's episode of the podcast. Which, by the way, I don't know if now is a good time to mention or not, but we have a special announcement about next week's episode of the podcast that we'll talk about at the end of today's episode. So stay tuned for the end of today's podcast, when there'll be a special announcement about next week's episode of the podcast. A little bit of a teaser right there. So, to conclude our talk, before we begin our discussion of episode 7 of The Acolyte, we posed last week during the podcast, "Will Soul turn to the dark side?" The folks over on YouTube voted resoundingly no at 85% no, 15% yes. And then the folks over on Twitter even more resoundingly voted no at 93% no and 7% yes. So seems like most people are in agreement that Soul is not going to turn to the dark side, even though he has some, you know, we would call like gray at best tendencies with
Hmm.
kind of the way he acts emotionally. But all in all, people are leaning more towards no on that note. And so stay tuned for this week's community question, community poll, which you can cast your vote and have your voice be heard on the YouTube community tab, on the Hoth Hangout channel, or on the Hoth Hangout Twitter, or X, I should say, formerly known as Twitter. Again, stay tuned to both of those platforms if you're interested in voting in this week's poll and having your voice heard in this week's poll. So check it out. The time has arrived, Joey. It's time for our episode 7 discussion of the Acolyte. Again, the episode was titled Choice. Um, and I noted that just looking at the episode titles, they all are either um, like the slash titles where it's like one thing or another. And the episodes that don't have a slash title in them are singular titles that are oftentimes tied to another episode in the show. So
Hmm.
this one, obviously being a rehashing of episode 3, episode 3 was also one of those episodes that was just a singular word. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Destiny, just off the top of my head. So you had Destiny for episode 3, Choice for episode 7.
Hmm.
Um, I guess my general thoughts about the episode before we begin our specifics discussion is that it felt obviously there's a lot of negative sentiment going around about this episode, and I think it's fair to understand why, to say the least. I think what might be one of the more under talked about points that this episode kind of did for me was that it shifted the direction of the show when we're really not left with much time with the show in general. We had episode 3, which was resoundingly, the most critiqued and least liked episode of The Acolyte. Things felt like they were sort of starting to move in a good direction. Like with episode 5 in particular was probably the best episode of the show. At least it was my favorite episode, and it felt like it received less critical feedback. We're moving in this direction of learning more about Chimere. We've had this big reveal. We're learning more and more about his motivations, and then it's like, boom, 180. We're back to the flashback episode, and it kind of just felt like we regressed a little bit back to, I guess, a part of the show that left a lot of fans with a bad taste in their mouth. Did you have a similar experience, a different experience? What were your overall thoughts on the episode?
When I realized that this was going to be a flashback episode, I realized that we're not going to see Chimere at all in this episode. So right there, I was like, I'm not going to like this episode as much, right? Because my buddy Manny is not here. Uh, but like you said, episode 3 being the most criticized one of the season up to this point, now going to relive it from Soul's point of view, I was hoping that it would give a little bit more aha, moments where
Mhm.
you would see it and you're like, okay, this all makes sense. I understand why this happened. This is, so it was filling in these gaps, right? But it feels like, unfortunately, it kind of did the opposite, where it brought up more things that kind of didn't make. It was more of like the things that they did fill in the gaps with didn't make sense in Star Wars time.
Mhm.
Now, I understand if they're trying to shift the paradigm, if you will, a little bit about the Jedi. I think this is probably the biggest criticism that most would have, if they have any criticism at all about this episode, is that just the thought processes of the Jedi in this particular episode just did not seem like something that they would normally do.
Right.
So, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But so I think that is where the beginning and the end of this episode lays, is just the way the Jedi act during this episode. And I just can't, and it's very hard for me to even get away from thinking of that as well. For the most part, I think you and I have been very open-minded for this series, but I think this was the episode when we're both like, I don't know, man. So
Yeah.
I think that's just how it came to be. There is still one more episode left. There is still a shot, that this becomes much better. But up until this point, just like you said, the momentum was going so well. We were discovering more about Chimere, and just that entire story was very intriguing. And then you just completely went back to episode 3, one that we already didn't like, as much, I should say, and we got even more of the confusion that we got from back then.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a little bit frustrating as a fan, like having you know practically the same episode, just told from a certain point of view, if you will. I mean, obviously there was a little bit of new stuff more towards the end of the episode, but it just felt like this whole episode could have been condensed into like a 5-minute add-on to episode 3, or maybe 10 minutes. But just seeing everything from the exact everything that happened from a different perspective. When you're at the second to last episode of the show, now if the show would have been like 16 episodes, I could easily see justifying having an episode like this in addition to the episode 3, even if I wasn't really a fan of either episode. Just but in terms of storytelling, it's like we're at the second to last episode, and you're using this to tell a backstory. Which, by the way, the conclusion of the backstory was supposed to be like the aha moment of this season. Like, that's what we've been wondering, and it felt like, "What?"
Mm.
That was, like, the major feeling at the end of the episode. So, again, we'll talk more of that as we go throughout our discussion of the episode, but, just to kinda kick off our general sentiments about episode 7, that's kind of where it left us. Um, but it opens up, and the Jedi, we see them on Bryndock. They've been there for 7 weeks. It's a little bit unclear to me how what they were doing was connected to their searching for the Vergence that they called it. But they're, like, collecting moss, and they're using, like,
Hmm.
metal detectors, and I don't really expect that we'll get an explanation for exactly how that works, but I just thought it was kind of like I guess, an odd way of depicting that they're searching for this thing, on this planet, which is largely unknown to them, and
Is a Vergence detector. You get that off
yeah.
eBay, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, Star Wars eBay back in the day, um, but yeah, I mean, to go off of that, a Vergence, we know is a concentration of force energy centered around a location, of the location in this case being Bryndock, and it can also create life as seen on Bryndock. And so we were actually watching the episode, and this is just me admitting like that I was ignorant of the fact that this word had even been used specifically in Star Wars before. I found out after the fact through watching other, content on the episode 7 synopsis that Qui-Gon uses this word "vergence" to refer to his discovery of Anakin on Tatooine. So, it's a very purposeful choice actually that they
Mm.
use the word "vergence." It's another way of, comparing whatever May and Osha are to what Anakin is going to be. Um, so, I mean, I think that's a pretty intentional choice. I think it's one that a lot of Star Wars fans, I think for good reason, would take issue with. I mean, if I'm being honest, it's kind of something I would probably take issue with. It's like,
Mm.
here's this whole Skywalker saga centered around um, this boy, a virgin in the Force, who was more or less born of the Force. His, his status as the chosen one, his fall to the dark side, and his eventual triumph of evil because of the belief that his son had in him, that there was still good in him. Like this is what Star Wars is. It's the story of Anakin Skywalker, like episodes 1 through 6. Um, and now you've got these two other people who are essentially the same thing as Anakin. I mean, they're like his
Mhm.
Force sisters, if you want to think about it that way. So it's like, well, what does this mean for the legacy of Anakin Skywalker or Star Wars as a whole? Really, I think that's a question a lot of people are having. It's not one that I'm like inherently critical of, just for the fact that it exists. Um, but it's one that I feel like needs a little bit of answering. Like, why is Anakin's specialness so special in the prequel trilogy if two other people are the same thing? You know what I mean? Did it leave you feeling that way at all?
I mean, I definitely had those thoughts that it would undermine what the entire storyline of Anakin, but at the same time, it's a universe. You know,
Mhm.
just because it's happened in one place doesn't mean that is the only place it could ever happen. Now,
Mm.
if this story, I'll admit it. If this story was a little bit better, maybe people wouldn't have such a huge deal with it.
Mm,
I wonder if that is one of the big things is that they're seeing this and they're like, well, this is just not. A lot of people just are not enjoying this show, so they're kind of throwing it on top of it as well, where they're just
mm,
like, well, this is, in addition to it not being a good show, it's rewriting all this history and all this, and it's just an argument point for them as well. But I do get why people would be upset about it. The people hold this franchise, very close to their heart, and if anything changes out of it, I mean, let's look at the sequel trilogy for God's sakes. That is definitely one of the things that people just completely will hammer because of how Luke was during that entire trilogy. So
mhm.
these are the types of things that fans will get behind, go against. And I personally, for me though, I get it, but as you know, I'm more of like, okay, well, yeah, okay, I get it. It happened here. It happened with Anakin. Okay, I can let it go. So I didn't feel too much against it, but I also do recognize why people would.
Right, yeah, yeah, and I can appreciate what you said too, like, on the surface, I don't really have an issue with there being other vergences in the universe of Star Wars. I mean, I think the only part that I take issue with is, like, if the Jedi did or didn't know about it, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
sure.
Just, like, on the surface, like, the fact that there is another versions isn't necessarily something that I take issue with, just kind of what the implications of that might be for the Jedi Council, both in this time period and 80 years after this time period, so, um, yeah, I mean, just thought that was worth saying as well, but, shortly after that, Soul finds these twins, we see them arguing from this different POV than we saw in episode 3, and it's funny, I didn't know if it was, like, more or less creepy. I feel like it was less creepy the way it was depicted in this episode, 'cause
Right.
it was like him stumbling upon them rather than it seeing he was, like, tracking them or something like that.
Absolutely.
Um, but he ends up following them, and he sees this conversation, this argument they're having, which eventually, leads to, him discovering this castle on the center of this mountain where these witches live, the Brendock witches, and this is where he sees Mother Anastasia, Mother Coral, and so he reports this back to the other three Jedi, including Torben and Dara and Kelnaka, and they all go to visit the coven of witches together. And this is when they're trying to Soul is trying to get Indara to make the point that like we need to test May and Osha so that we can bring them back to Coruscant and have them trained because they're force sensitive, as he's seen. Which, by the way, did you find it odd at all in the scene that happens before the Jedi actually enter? Indara is saying to them, like, "I need to do this on my own,"
Mm-hmm.
and Soul's like, "No, we need to go with you," and she's like, "Okay, you can come." Like it didn't feel like there was any like the
Urgency or
yeah,
reason or pulling rank or anything.
right. I was like, "Oh, okay." I mean, she changed her mind pretty quickly on that, but all right. Um, so obviously we know how this meeting goes down, but the one aspect of it that was different was we got to actually see what was happening inside Torben's mind, when he's taken over and his eyes turn black. And Mother Anastasia takes over his mind and he's confessing that he wants to go back to Coruscant. Which by the way, like Torben's character in this episode, I found to be like very whiny. Like
Mm-hmm.
your whole like you're a Jedi and like you're spending the whole episode being like, I just want to go home. I just want to go back to Coruscant. I just want to go home. I'm like, dude, why are you a Jedi?
Right. And I will say this part here with Mother Anastasia getting in his mind, it was for me was probably one of the better parts of this episode because you got to see what it was that she was doing to him.
hmm
So you're able to see uh her magics and what she's actually doing to get into these people's heads. So I thought that was kind of cool, because when you just see the eyes go black, you have zero idea context of what's going on. So this part was actually pretty cool for me.
Yeah. Did it feel like the way it was done to you, um, was Like, it just felt like she was talking a lot about, like, desire and what he wants,
Mhm.
kind of like these dark side terminology, if you will.
Yeah.
But then, like, what it was centering around was not, like, him wanting to, like, betray the Jedi or, like, follow a Sith ideology or, like, do something against the Jedi code, like, I don't know, like, have a girlfriend or, like,
Yeah.
just something that breaks the rules, essentially. But the thing she was focusing on was just, like, him not wanting to be there. Like, I get it, and also at the same time, I was like, "This feels like it would have been more impactful in a way if it was something that felt more important to the plot."
Mhm.
Does that if that makes sense? Or not necessarily the plot, but just, like, to Torben as a character. Like, if he has, like, some longing for something that's, like, against the Jedi code.
Right.
But I thought it was done well, I can agree with you on that. I just thought it would have been, like, if he
A little bit
wanted
more
to.
meaningful.
Yeah, yeah, other than just centered around his desire to not be there. I was like, "Oh, okay, like, I get it, I guess," but
I think this particular dialogue is it can be parallel to Kamir and Osha's dialogue in the previous couple episodes,
mhm,
where he also uses the word desire. So I
mhm,
think that's very deliberate, the use of that word. Maybe not even so much of what that person desires, whether it is just to be home or whether it is to swim in the pool with Chimera, whatever. I think I think that's the important part of it, is that word desire and what it means to that person. So
right.
whether it is something as you and I would call kind of silly, just like I just want to go home, it's his desire after all. So
Yeah,
I think that's the important part that we take away from this scene.
sure, yeah. Well, and by the end of the episode, he says, "I've fortified my mind," so, I guess, whatever happens here more or less shifts his perspective or his experience of wanting to go home, that he's able to withstand it when it tries when they're about to try to do it again at the end of the episode. But kind of moving on from that, Soul believes Osha is meant to be his Padawan for some reason, like following this encounter. Like he's just very determined to like rescue these girls, which I think is very admirable and like a character quality about Soul that I like and I admire and I enjoy that is part of his character. But at the same time, I feel I feel like the justification for Soul feeling so strongly about saving May and Osha. Um, I don't know. Maybe I'll ask it as a question rather. Do you feel like that's just like who he is, um, or I don't know. It almost feels like there should be like a little bit more of backstory with
Right.
why he so desperately wants them to be rescued. Um, I mean, maybe he's just like a really good guy. He's got a heart for kids. I don't know.
Right.
Uh,
Uh, Indara teased him earlier on in the episode about him not having a Padawan, and
yeah, yeah,
I don't think that's where it stems from, but that was there for a reason too, So I
right.
wonder if there's a little bit of him really trying to make it happen as
Hmm.
well. Not necessarily. I mean, he's a Jedi, so he's supposed to be good. He wants to help these kids out for sure. But maybe there's a little bit of him that wants a Padawan. He wants to train another, and things like little jabs from Indara, just only make him want it more. Maybe
Mm,
that's his desire. I don't know.
right.
That's just like I said. I think that line was in there, or that interaction with Indara was there purposefully, where she's like, you don't even. That's why you don't have a Padawan. But now he is like gung ho wants this, wants Osha to be his Padawan.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make. I didn't even think about putting those 2 things together, and I think there's definitely something to be said for, the reasoning for that scene with Endara, like you said, kind of, hinting us as an audience to think, well, maybe he really does want a Padawan just that bad, and maybe that's extra motivation for him to save the girls or something. Um, so of course, they both come in one by one to be tested, and May has this quote. She comes in first before Osha, and they're talking about the ascension. They're asking her kind of basically just what it is and what it entails. And he has this quote where she says, "Everyone must walk through fear. Everyone must be sacrificed to fulfill their destiny." pretty powerful coming from like a 8-year-old or however old they're supposed to be in this scene. What did you make of that quote, Joey?
um, I don't want to be a part of that coven because that is scary stuff to have a child recite back to
Right.
you. I think it is exactly what it is. Is that that who was it? I think it was Endara that said they have these rituals. that is very common amongst certain people of different planets, and this is just theirs. As creepy as it is, and we've talked about the horror vibe this show sometimes comes off with. I think this is just an example of it. Is to have a child say the word sacrifice is a little unnerving to me.
Yeah, yeah, definitely so. Well, after she and her sister are both tested, um, most of the OSHA scene we actually saw in episode 3, so very little of it was shown in episode 7. But it's Torben who says the blood test results are in, and that the symbiotes are the same between the twins, indicating that they are not merely just sisters, but like literally the same consciousness that was split at some point in their, conception by the Force, if you will. Um, so, again, kind of another equivocation to Anakin being a virgins, they being a virgins, created by the Force. And the other funny part about this scene that I I think I laughed when we were watching it. He says like, the symbiotes are so not only both high, but they're the same. And then he says very force sensitive. And I was like, oh, okay, like that is like,
Give us a little credit here, guys.
yeah, it felt like it was written by someone who like watched Star Wars for the first time a couple weeks ago. And they're like, okay, what else? Oh, very, very, very force sensitive. It's like, oh, okay. It's like so on the nose that it was like a little bit annoying.
Mhm.
But um, so after they've been tested back at the coven, Mother Coral is in fear that May and Osha are going to be taken, and so he makes May upset on purpose to try to provoke her to smash a door to prevent people from leaving. Um, I just thought
Here's
that
where the
was
questions start.
yeah, yeah. Here's where the questions start. So she makes her mad. She's like trying to provoke her. May's like, "All right, no one's leaving. Osha's staying here." So she smashes the door. They incite all the other witches to kind of like rally with them against the Jedi who are going to be here soon. Um, and then there's the scene with the fire, Joey. The fire, which we thought was purposefully set by May, which you could argue it still maybe initially was purposeful, like the burning of the thing. Of course, she didn't really intend for the whole place to burn down, we now know. Um, Also there was more, I don't know what we're gonna call it, like fluid that could have
Yeah.
caused the flames to combust. So I guess the initial fire makes slightly more sense now. I'm still not sure, like, how the whole stone fortress burned
Hmm.
down, but I guess it makes more sense how the initial fire could have started. But, there's this very intentional, purposeful scene where it shows her trying to put the flames out. Um, so even this big thing which we've been, told throughout the course of the show that May is to blame for the cause of this fire, which she is, but ultimately, like, it wasn't something that she did on purpose. Like, her intention was never to burn the whole place down, or to, like, kill her sister, really. Just, I guess, to trap her in the room. So, an important revelation in the scheme of things. I guess it makes May seem slightly less, uh, psychotic? I don't know what the word
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't know what the word is to use, but, um, the Jedi are reapproaching at this point in time, I believe it's Mother Anastasia who says to them, "Someday, those noble intentions you all have will destroy all of the Jedi in the galaxy." What did you make of this quote? I'm curious what your thoughts were on this one.
I mean, she's foreshadowing, obviously, and we all think of Order 66 right away when we think all the Jedi being wiped from the galaxy.
Mhm.
I think that was, a little lob for us to be like, we know what that is, and I think the noble intentions is I like that. I like how they use that because I mean, in all, that's what this entire episode was noble intentions. This was supposed to be, Soul just wanting to get the girls to safety. This is just them trying to figure out what's going on with these virginsons on this planet. Noble, noble, noble. But we come across these witches, and this, it just seems like it just completely just goes out of control here pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And actually right at this at this point here that happens next here. So I think the but yeah, I think that line, although very very pointed, obviously, I think they were referring to Order 66. I think it's a good line. I like the line, but obviously without any context, you're just like, okay, well, it's kind of it's a pretty good threat.
Yeah. 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 Of course, like you mentioned, relating to the fall of the Jedi, that will inevitably happen as we know in the future. I really want to dive into this next part because I think it left a lot of people confused, including myself. Um, May runs out. Soul, for some reason, thinks she's OSHA. And not to be like dense, but I don't understand how Soul continues throughout the show to mistake May and OSHA. Especially like in the flashback scenes when there are 2 different actors playing the girls, and, like, visually,
Hmm.
they have different facial characteristics.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so for us to, like, be able to look at, like, one of them and be like, "Oh, that's May," and Soul, a Jedi who should be able to probably sense this, to look at her and identify
You're wrong.
her as the wrong twin. It's like, "Soul, come on, buddy," like, I'm, like, not entirely sold by that, but the real part of this scene I wanted to focus on, of course, was the whole smoke bird demon thing that Mother Anastasia turns into. Um, so before we dive into it, she turns into this thing, turning into smoke. May is also beginning to turn into smoke, which Soul thinks that's OSHA. And Soul thinking, or I guess seeing that May is like disintegrating practically, like, well, I'm going to do the only logical thing here and try to prevent her from what he thinks is death, I guess. And so stabs Mother Anastasia. Which, by the way, we now are officially back on the lightsabers are lethal part of part of Star
Right.
Wars. But um, and then she proceeds to tell him in her dying breath that she was going to let May go,
OSHA.
or sorry, yeah, Osha go. Um, and so I really feel somewhat confused, like, what was even happening? I don't know. I honestly don't have an answer to this. Do you have any sense of kind of what was going on with the turning into the demon smoke bird thing?
No. I have no I have no theory of what it was happening, what was trying to happen. The only reference that we have is a little bit later on when Mother Coral does it and she kind of just disappears.
Mhm,
So I don't know if that was her attempt to get her and run, because I mean, we know that's May, right?
mhm.
So was that her attempt to take the one twin that was not going to go with him and just kind of just book, and that's kind of it? I mean, it seems kind of lame, in the grand scheme of things, but maybe that she was just trying to protect her.
Yeah,
She realized what was happening. These witches know. They have we call it the force, they call it the thread, right? They know what's going on, so maybe they're able to sense certain things, and she was like, "We need to get out of here right now." So maybe that's all
mhm.
that she was doing, because, like I said, that's what Mother Coral does a little bit later. She just kind of bounces, and that's it. So maybe that's all it was that she was trying to do.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just wondering, like, why she wouldn't have just been like, "Hey, guys, let's stop it.
Right? Yeah.
let's talk this out." She's, like, the pacifist one after all. It's like,
Hmm.
let's have a conversation about this." But I don't know. What happened, and, she turns to smoke. May starts to turn to smoke. Soul kills Mother Anastasia. She says she was gonna let Osha go. So, obviously, there's a lot of guilt, resulting from this, and Soul carries this not only with him after the fact now, but through the next 16 years of the show. And so Mother Coral gets enraged. She has this like battle cry she does, and um, begins to fight Soul, and Soul is not igniting his lightsaber and kind of refusing to fight her. And so shortly thereafter, she turns to smoke, um, and disappears. So you're thinking, okay, what's going on? You learn right after that that Kelnaka has been possessed by the rest of the coven of witches, and maybe Mother Coral too. It was a little bit
Wow.
unclear to me. Um, I mean, what is your feelings on this? Because if Mother Coral was also involved in the possessing of Kelnaka, wouldn't she have died with the rest of the witches when
Right.
Indara like forced them out? So I mean, that leads into our kind of question of the week this week. So maybe we can rehash that in a bit. But the witches, are doing their I
Hmm.
don't know what you call it, like rotating thing, and they possess Kelnaka collectively, and so he then fights against both Soul and Torben together. So we got our Wookiee Jedi wish in this scene. Honestly, this was my favorite part of the episode was getting to see
Yeah, that's
uh,
true.
this lightsaber duel go down. I mean, it was a little bit clunky, but that's kind of just because Wookiees are so massive
Huge.
and yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so the fight commences, and the one thing I was also going to focus on here, I wanted to ask you, it didn't feel like I saw, Kelnaka getting possessed by the witches, and I think my first instinct was, "Oh, like, he's not strong enough to resist that?"
Hmm.
Was that a thought that you had, or did it feel like it I don't know,
At
like it
I
was
think
justified?
at first when I thought it was just Mother Coral, I
Mhm,
was a little bit shocked at it. But then when you come to realize it was just the entire coven of witches possessing him, then
mhm.
it's just like, okay, well, okay, that's possible.
Yeah, just like a strength in numbers sort of thing, probably.
Exactly.
Um,
The power of many, right? Isn't that one of their
y
things?
yeah, exactly, yeah. Um, so, this battle goes down. Torben has his face all scratched up. More or less, Kanaka's like kind of winning the fight before Indara steps in and sort of forces the Coven of Witches out of his mind. And again, this is for me the most confusing part of the episode. By forcing the witches out, they all die? Question mark.
Hmm.
Um, I just I don't know. I don't really have words for this part.
Hmm.
I felt I rewatched this a second time with my fiance today, and um, she looks at me at this part and goes, "What? How did they die?" Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
It was kinda one of those moments. I don't wanna elaborate too much on it just 'cause, ultimately, that's just I didn't feel like it made sense. I did you feel like you had any sense of kind of what the decision behind having the witches go down that way was?
My only thought was maybe they're not dead. That was my only kind
Mhm,
of hope. I found myself doing that a lot this episode where I kind of gave reasons. I try to make logic out of what I was watching, and that was definitely one of those times when I wanted it not to be like, okay, they no, they can't be dead. There's no way that
mhm.
she just killed all of the entire coven in one fell swoop like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and moreover, it kind of sheds light on a mystery of the show. This whole time it's like, "Oh, like, the Jedi killed all the witches somehow." And then you find out, "Oh, they just died of, overexertion." I mean, I don't
Hmm.
know, so definitely one of the more confusing points of the episode for me.
I did want to just mention Padme died of a broken heart. Just want
That is a great point,
just
and
want to
also,
put that out
like,
there.
worth putting that out there that's an overlooked kind of weird part of Revenge of the Sith. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good point, that's a good point.
just saying.
Um, so then the next scene when May and Osha are on the bridge, we see this scene from a different perspective, and that Soul is the one holding up both the sides, and ultimately makes the decision that he can save one but not the other, and chooses Osha, which is also where we can presume a lot of his guilt about this whole thing comes from. Um, I I think my And I can overlook this because this more so is a storytelling device for his guilt. So this one doesn't bother me quite as much, but the rationalist Star Wars fan in me was like, "Why doesn't he just force lift the girls instead of force lifting the bridge and, like, struggling
Yeah,
to do
yeah.
it?" You know? They both weigh, like, I don't know, 60, 70 pounds. It's like he literally lifted OSHA from falling over the cliff in episode 1 or 2 or whenever that was, so I don't know. It again, I don't have an issue with this from a plot,
Mhm.
telling device because it was meant to progress or to cause guilt in the character of Soul for letting one of them go. So I understand it from that perspective. Again, from like a rational thing, I was like, just like force lift them both up, Soul. But ultimately, makes the decision to save Osha. May presumably falls to her death, which is why he carried this guilt for so many years. And so the aftermath of this entire thing is that Indara makes the decision that they will quote unquote tell the truth, which means that May burn down the fortress, and that's all they're going to share. Another big question here, like, there's got to be more to Indara.
Mhm.
There was hints throughout this episode that like she was acting like a little, sneaky or suspicious. Like I kept getting a little flavors of that, especially in the scene where May and Osha were being tested earlier in the episode. Like, what motivation do you have, Master Indara? What motivation does she have to not want to tell the council what happened? Like,
Right.
this is the linchpin of the entire show. Like this is the thing that they've kept a secret. And the whole show, you're led to believe that they just like, you know, unjustifiably wiped out this race of Brendok witches. And then you see the episode and you're like, well, they all just kind of died except for one who they killed because Soul thought she was killing another girl. So it was like in defense of a child, the one person you killed, and that's what you're not wanting to tell the council. I'm like, I'm left feeling like you said at the top of the episode, the motivations of the Jedi, or rather the portrayal of the Jedi as like not being a force of good, like the peacekeepers of the galaxy, so to speak. It just like my main question is why is the first instinct of pretty much every Jedi in this show to like, oh, let's not tell the council. You,
Right.
you know what I mean? I don't really get that, but what did you think about Indara? Do you think there's more to her than we're being led to believe?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So with Indara, she was steadfast the most solid Jedi for I feel like almost the entire episode until right here
Hmm.
when everything she was saying, why would you throw this little girl's dreams away? I'm like, what does that? Since when does that even matter? When is I mean I appreciate that thought, but at the same time, that's not something that she should base a decision off of. Especially this decision, whether or
Hmm.
not to tell the console, the high council about this. I just I couldn't understand why the entire time she's telling Soul to not be emotional, and then the last thing she does in the episode is making an emotional type of decision,
Yeah.
a decision based off emotion. It just doesn't make sense to me. And you even mentioned it, I believe, during the reaction. Torben, this wasn't really his doing. I mean, maybe
Right.
there was a little, maybe he was he definitely had part of it. He was the one that kind of, went crazy and just like, all right, we got to go get it. This is what's going to get us back to Coruscant. And I get maybe that's where his thought process was there, but I mean to hold on to that after all of these years, being in isolation for so long and then deciding I would rather die than to tell anybody about this. It didn't make sense to me.
Yeah. I'm there with you. And I mean, I mean, I guess we can go straight into our episode grades. With all of these questions that we had about the episode, um, I guess for me, this is my, and again, if those of you who have never listened to the podcast before don't know how Joey and I kind of grade our episodes, we personally are like, if anything Star Wars, as good or bad as it might be, like I feel like just the fact alone that it's new content for me merits like at least a 4 out of 10. Like, I don't feel like I'm ever gonna hate something so much that I would ever give it lower than a 4, if it is Star Wars. I mean, maybe some fans out there would argue that this isn't Star Wars, but, um, for me, that's why I would never go below that. So, having said that, I'm gonna give this episode a 5.5 out of
Mhm.
10. It's my lowest grade of the season. I did like it less than episode 3, which was previously my lowest grade of the season. Again, it just left me with so many questions, not understanding character motivations. The big 2 things being, why was this the big secret that was being held all season, and why were people willing to literally die rather than just tell the council? Um, and then the other big thing being the Jedi being the bad guys. Like, why is the initial instinct of every Jedi, like, "Don't tell the council, like, we'll get in trouble." Like, what is the theoretical consequence of just telling them what happened? Like, the "Oh, do we're at our council meeting. Hey, we had these witches, we killed one of them because we were trying to protect this girl, and the rest of them tried to, like, kill Kel Naka by taking over him. We protected him, and then all the witches just died. We didn't even kill them." And they tell the council, like, "Okay, like, we're glad you told us, like, you're on probation for a month, and then you're good." Like, it doesn't
Right,
like, these aren't people who are gonna, like, be executed for
right.
accidentally killing one person in order to defend a child. It's like, what was the bad thing that happened? I don't know. So, anyways, I'll get off my soapbox, sorry. For those
No, I think
reasons, I'm going 5.5. How about you?
yeah, previously episode 3 was also my least favorite of the season. This is now my least favorite of the season, so I rated it at a 7 where I think I gave 7.5 to episode 3, and I got a lot of flack for it because the grade was so high, but again, as Ben mentioned, we do enjoy our Star Wars, and for the most part we like most Star Wars. But for this, I think the reason I didn't like it more is because of where it was in the season, especially because we had such good momentum going into this episode with Chimere, with Osha and May, with Cortosa's helmet. I mean, there was a lot of things that was happening going into this episode, and then to backtrack and fall back. If this was episode 4, I think I would have been better with it,
Mhm.
because we didn't have to wait for it. This the ultimate episode, and because this is supposed to be the banger. This is supposed to be
Right.
the one where like going into the finale, we're hype, we're ready to go. I don't have that feeling going into the finale. I have a little bit of anxiety. I'm a little bit worried about what we're gonna see
Yeah.
in the finale or what we're not gonna see in the finale. So that for that reason, I gave it a lower score than episode 3.
Mhm.
Um, I could argue it to be like even a 6 or a 6.5 or whatever. I mean, these are all just numbers. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. But I mean, for the most part, this, although it was Star Wars, I get maybe they're really trying to have a different perspective of the Jedi. I appreciate that. That they are. I think I read somewhere like they're humans after all, other than Kalnaka, but so they do have their flaws and all that. But to have all those flaws at the same time with multiple Jedi, I don't necessarily buy that piece of it.
Yeah.
So for all those reasons, I'll give it this up.
Yeah, like, in principle, I'm not opposed to the Jedi being depicted in a more negative light. It feels like it needs to be, like, justified for them to be, like, making these poor decisions or these emotional decisions, and it just kind of feels like a little bit willy-nilly almost some of the time, but, I guess let us know down in the comments what your thoughts were about the episode. Definitely gonna be sharing some of this week's comments in next week's episode of the podcast, particularly about Mother Coral. That's the one we want to pose to you today. Our viewer question of the week. Feel free to respond down in the comments and over on the socials. Will Mother Coral be in the finale of the Acolyte? Let us know down in the comments. Which also leads us to our surprise announcement we wanted to give in regards to next week's episode of the podcast, episode 9. It's going to be a live episode of the
Ooh.
Hoth Hangout podcast. Fun stuff. So if you're a longtime listener, if you're a new listener, we welcome you to join us next Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, or excuse me, 9 p.m. Eastern time. That is 6 p.m. Pacific time if you're over on the West Coast. And we're going to be doing a live breakdown of the podcast. Yeah, Givo in the podcast chat saying no doubt it will be 2 hours long. Probably because
New
it is a
record,
live.
guys.
Yeah, yeah. Probably because it is a live episode. It's going to be a bit longer, but we welcome you to join us once again next week at 9 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday, July 17th, for our complete breakdown and synopsis of the Acolyte finale, as well as just the show as a whole. Get our thoughts, get your thoughts. That way we can communicate back and forth with one another as a community of Star Wars fans during the live episode of the podcast. So we are very much looking forward to that, and we'll hope to catch you all next week during it as well. Well, as we have just gone over the hour mark for the episode, now is a great time, as great a time as any, to let you know that if you're not yet subscribed to the Hoth Hangout channel on YouTube, definitely check us out there for the video version of every podcast, as well as all of our reactions to new episodes of any Star Wars shows, including the Acolyte episodes, which you can watch our reactions to now available on YouTube. Thank you to the 437 of you who are subscribers. You can contact us via email, hothhangout@gmail.com, with your Star Wars thoughts, questions, or otherwise, and we'd love to showcase them here on the pod. Additionally, the Hoth Hangout podcast is findable wherever you get your pods, including both Spotify and Apple. And if you're listening on either of those platforms or any platform that allows you to leave a 5-star review, leave a 5-star review on the pod. We would appreciate it very much. And it also does allow it to be more easily discovered by other fans of Star Wars as well. You can find us at Hoth Hangout on all of the socials, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, or X, formerly known as Twitter. Check us out there on each of the socials and follow us for the latest Star Wars news. You can find the link to the Hoth Hangout community Discord server down in the show notes of today's episode as well. Check it out and see everything that the Hoth Hangout community Discord server has to offer. To conclude our episode today, Joey, any last final thoughts on Collide episode 7 or any thoughts looking forward to episode 8?
Up to this point, what a roller coaster this season has been. Both highs and lows, maybe a couple more lows than we'd like to admit. But we're here. We'll get to the next week. We're going to do a live show I'm really excited about. So just stay tuned. It's going to be a fun time. We promise.
Through it all, as some of as you mentioned, the highs and lows of this show has been. Nonetheless, I still somehow do have hope for next week. So
Me too.
um,
What is wrong with us? I agree.
I want to be genuinely shocked by something in the finale. That's my
Like in a good way, though. Like in a good
yeah,
way.
in a good way, in a good way. My one desire. So hopefully that can.
Ooh,
Did you like what I
not
did
the
right there?
not the desire. Oh no. Not surprised.
Yeah, yeah. Lastly, shout out and thank you to Givo for producing today's show, video, and assets, who would be able to save both of us from a broken bridge. I have no doubt. I have no doubt. Even when he's under the weather like he is today.
Yeah.
Shout out to Gibbo for sticking in there today after a long work week last week and feeling a bit under the weather. So we appreciate you, man. Thank you for all you do for the podcast, and thank you to all of you for listening to today's episode. We appreciate you very much. Shout out to George Lucas. Shout out to Dave Filoni. Shout out to, what are we doing this week? Like bird, raven, demon, smoke monsters. How does that sound?
Sounds scary, like I said before, but it's fine.
And Wookiee Jedi, who we finally got to see in action for the first time this week. So once again, we appreciate you all very much. Catch us next week in episode 89 of the podcast. Once again, that's Wednesday, July 17th at 9 p.m. Eastern, where we will be doing a live podcast on YouTube, breaking down the episode 8 and just the Acolyte as a whole. So we hope you can join us for that. Once again, thank you so much for listening. This has been episode 88 of the Hoth Hangout podcast, and we will catch you in the next one. And until next time, may the Force be with you.